Apache widow was stealing. "My kids are hungry," she begged when the childless rancher caught her. The desert was quiet, stretching endlessly under a cold moon. The land near the Arizona territory was wide and open, with dusty trails, scattered bushes, and the occasional dry riverbed. Nights here were usually peaceful, but for some, they were filled with fear, worry, and hunger. Atza, a young widow, was one of those people. She had lost her husband during a conflict months ago, and ever since, she had been left alone to care for her two small children. Life had become a constant struggle. Every day she worried about finding food, water, and shelter, and every night she prayed her children would not go to bed hungry. Her husband had been her protector, her partner in daily survival, and her best friend. Without him, Atza faced the world alone. The children, too young to understand the full danger around them, relied entirely on their mother. They were small, fragile, and easily frightened, but their eyes held hope, hope that she could provide, hope that somehow they would survive. Atza could not let that hope fade. She had to be strong for them. Each morning began early. She would wake before dawn, listening to the cold wind whistle through the desert. The air was dry, filled with the faint smell of sand and sage. The children would stir, rubbing their eyes and murmuring softly, and she would prepare whatever small amount of food she had left. Often, it was just a few dried beans or some wild plants she had gathered. Sometimes she could find a few grains left from old storage, but not often. She tried to make each meal stretch, cutting it into tiny portions so that each child would have at least a little to eat. Days were spent walking long distances. Atza would search for edible plants, nuts, and roots, careful to avoid snakes or other dangers that lurked in the desert. Sometimes she would see animals, rabbits, or small birds, but she did not have the tools to catch them. She had no traps, no weapons, and nothing to barter with. Her life had become a test of patience, courage, and resilience. Each step across the sandy trails was filled with hope and worry. She hoped to find something to eat, and worried that the children might cry out from hunger before she could bring anything home. Despite her struggle, Atza was careful not to let her children see her fear. She would smile when they looked up at her, laughing softly to hide the pain in her heart. She sang quiet songs to soothe them at night, songs her husband had taught her long ago, filled with love and stories of their family. Even when her own stomach ached, she gave the little food she had to the children first. Hunger was easier to bear than seeing them suffer. The nights were the hardest. The desert could be freezing, with winds cutting through their thin blankets. Atza would huddle close to her children, wrapping them in her arms, whispering promises that tomorrow would be better. But tomorrow often brought the same struggles. Some days she would return with a handful of wild berries or a few roots, only enough for a small meal. Other days, she returned empty-handed, her heart heavy with worry. It was during one of these difficult nights that Atza made a decision that would change everything. Food had been scarce for several days, and the children were weak and crying. She had exhausted all the nearby sources of food. Her mind raced with thoughts of what to do next. She had heard stories of settlers who kept grain, flour, and other supplies in their barns, locked and guarded. She knew it was risky, but her children's hunger left her no choice. She dressed quietly in worn clothes and a thin shawl, careful not to wake her children. The moon was full, casting pale light across the desert, guiding her steps as she walked the miles toward the ranch she had heard about. Her heart pounded with fear and determination. Every sound made her jump, a coyote's cry, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, but she kept moving forward. She reminded herself that she was not stealing out of greed. She was trying to save her children. She had no other option. The ranch appeared in the distance as a dark shape against the silver moonlight. It was modest, surrounded by fences and with a small barn near the edge of the property. Atza approached carefully, staying in the shadows. Her eyes searched for openings, for any sign that someone might be awake. She could see stacked sacks near the barn, likely filled with grain or dried beans. Her stomach tightened with hope. This could be enough to feed her children for several days. She crept closer, trying to avoid making noise. Her hands shook, not only from the cold but from fear. She knew that if she was caught, there could be trouble. But the image of her children, hungry and fragile, gave her courage. She reminded herself again, this was for them. She reached the sacks and began gathering small amounts into the cloth she had brought. Each handful of grain felt heavy with responsibility and guilt. She worked quickly, but carefully, afraid that the slightest sound might alert the rancher. Suddenly a voice called out, sharp and commanding. "Hey, who's there?" Atsa froze, her heart jumping into her throat. A man stepped out from the shadows, holding a lantern that cast bright light across the ground. His eyes were wide, and he had a rifle slung over his shoulder. It was the rancher. Atsa dropped the cloth with a gasp. She looked up at the man, trembling. She wanted to explain, to tell him why she was there, but the words caught in her throat. Finally, she fell to her knees, her hands clasped together, tears running down her face. "My kids are hungry," she begged, her voice shaking with desperation. "Please, they are hungry." The rancher stared at her, surprised. He had expected a thief, someone greedy, someone looking to take what was not theirs. But this woman, she looked broken, exhausted, and terrified. There was no anger in her eyes, no greed, only a mother's love and worry for her children. For a long moment, the desert was silent except for the soft whimpering of the children nearby and the cold wind moving through the bushes. The rancher lowered his lantern slightly, studying her face. He noticed the dirt on her hands, the worn clothes, the tired eyes that had seen too much for someone so young. He realized she was not a criminal, not in the way he had expected. She was a mother in need. Atsa continued, her voice pleading. She told him about her husband, about the long days without food, about walking miles across the desert to find something for her children. Each word was full of pain and truth. She did not try to excuse herself. She did not try to lie. She simply explained her struggle, hoping that someone would understand. The rancher listened, his initial anger fading. He had worked hard for everything he owned. He had built his ranch alone, faced droughts, and battled loneliness. Yet hearing her story, something inside him softened. He remembered his own childhood, the times he had gone hungry, the nights he had wished for someone to care. He realized that what she was doing was not theft from greed, but survival from love. Finally, he spoke. "Bring your children here," he said. His voice was calm, steady, and surprisingly kind. Atsa blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. She had expected anger, punishment, or rejection. Instead, she was met with understanding. Without hesitation, she ran back to the spot where her children were hiding. They were small, frightened, and weak, but when they saw her, their faces lit up with hope. She took their hands and led them back to the ranch. For the first time in days, she could feel relief starting to ease the tight knot in her chest. She had risked everything, but it had worked. That night, the children ate warm food for the first time in days. Atsa watched them, tears of gratitude mixing with exhaustion. She whispered prayers of thanks under the moonlight. She knew the road ahead would still be hard, but for now, there was hope. For the first time since her husband's death, she felt that perhaps life might hold some kindness yet. The desert outside remained silent, but inside the small ranch, warmth filled the room. Atsa sat close to her children, holding them tightly. The night was long, but she no longer faced it alone. Somewhere beyond the shadows, a rancher had chosen compassion over anger, and that choice would change everything. This expanded version sets up Atsa's desperation, courage, and the rancher's internal conflict. It emphasizes emotion, detail, and survival in the desert while keeping the story engaging and suitable for all readers. Atsa led her children carefully across the desert floor, their small hands clutching hers tightly. The moon hung high, casting pale light on the rocky ground, illuminating the path to the ranch. The children were tired, their tiny feet dragging in the sand, but the thought of food and safety gave them energy. Each step felt heavier on Atsa's shoulders, not just because of the distance, but because of the uncertainty of what awaited them. She didn't know if the man who had caught her would turn them away, yell at them, or call for help. Her heart pounded as she imagined the worst. When they reached the ranch, Thomas Whitmore, the rancher, was waiting at the small gate. The lantern in his hand swung gently, throwing moving shadows across the ground. His eyes softened when he saw the children, recognizing immediately how weak and hungry they were. Atsa hurried forward, dropping to her knees, her children clinging to her skirts. "Please," she whispered again, "they have not eaten in days." Thomas did not speak immediately. He studied the little group before him. He noticed how thin the children were, their clothes ragged and worn. He saw the fear in their eyes and the worry etched into their mother's face. Something inside him stirred. He remembered his own childhood, when hunger had gnawed at his stomach and he had gone to sleep with nothing in his belly. That memory had haunted him for years, and now, seeing this mother and her children, he understood that she was not a criminal, she was desperate. "Come inside," he said finally, his voice calm and steady. Atsa blinked in surprise. She had expected anger or punishment, but instead she heard kindness. She did not hesitate. She gathered her children close, and together they followed Thomas through the gate and toward the small ranch house. The wooden structure looked simple, but it was solid. A warm glow escaped from the windows, and the smell of cooked food, bread, beans, and meat drifted out into the night. The children's eyes widened. They had not smelled anything like this in weeks, perhaps months. Inside, Thomas motioned to a small table. "Sit here," he said. "Eat." He brought out a loaf of bread, a bowl of beans, and a small plate of dried fruit. Atsa's hands shook as she helped her children eat. They had been so hungry that they devoured the food quickly, barely pausing to breathe. Their cheeks flushed with warmth, their energy returning slowly. Atsa watched them with a mixture of relief and awe. Tears filled her eyes. She had never imagined that a stranger would help them so freely without asking for anything in return. After the children had eaten, Thomas sat across from Atsa. She tried to stand tall to appear strong, but exhaustion weighed heavily on her. I did not mean to steal," she said softly. "I only wanted to feed my children." Thomas nodded. "I understand," he said. "I have seen hunger before. I know what it feels like to have nothing. You are not a thief. You are a mother." Atsa's eyes widened. No one had ever spoken to her with such understanding. Usually when settlers saw her people, they saw danger or trouble. But here in this quiet ranch house, she saw something different. She saw respect and compassion. For the next few days, Atsa and her children stayed in the small cabin near the ranch. Thomas provided food and blankets, but he also gave them space. He did not force them into his home or treat them like guests under his control. He allowed them to regain their strength, to rest, and to feel safe. Atsa worked hard during the day. She gathered firewood, cleaned the cabin, and helped prepare meals. Even in her own struggle, she wanted to give back, to show that she was grateful. The children, now strong enough, helped too, collecting small sticks for the fire or carrying water from the well. The ranch, once quiet and lonely, now had the sounds of life once again. Laughter, chatter, and tiny footsteps echoed across the wooden floorboards. Thomas watched them closely. At first, he kept his distance, unsure how to interact with Atsa and her children. He had lived most of his life alone, focused only on his cattle and his work. People rarely came to him for help, and he rarely asked for anything from others. Yet he found himself drawn to their presence. There was something about the way Atsa cared for her children, the way they clung to each other and still managed to smile, that softened his heart. One morning, Atsa sat outside, teaching her children how to recognize safe plants in the desert. "See this one?" she asked, pointing to a small green bush. "The leaves are safe to eat if you are hungry, but not all plants are good. You must be careful." The children nodded, their small hands reaching out to touch the leaves. Thomas watched from a distance, impressed by her knowledge and patience. She was not just surviving, she was teaching her children how to survive too. Word began to spread in the nearby town that Thomas Whitmore was sheltering an Apache widow and her children. Some neighbors whispered that it was dangerous, that he was being foolish. Others questioned why he would risk his supplies or his safety for people who were strangers. Thomas heard the whispers but paid no attention. He had made a choice and he would stand by it. Despite the quiet tension outside the ranch, life inside continued to improve. Atsa and her children became part of the daily rhythm. In the mornings, she would cook breakfast and help the children get ready for the day. Thomas would check the cattle and repair fences. The afternoons were spent gathering supplies, tending to the small garden near the cabin, and ensuring the children learned practical skills for survival. Atsa shared stories with her children about their father. She told them about his bravery, his kindness, and the lessons he had taught them. These stories brought comfort, reminding the children of their roots and their family. Thomas sometimes listened quietly, recognizing the importance of memory and tradition. He had no family of his own, but he could see how much these stories meant to the children. One afternoon, a small fire broke out near the hay storage. Atsa noticed the smoke first and shouted to Thomas. Together, they managed to put out the flames before they spread. The experience showed Thomas how brave and quick-thinking Atsa was. She did not panic, even in a dangerous moment, and she helped save much of the ranch's supplies. From that day, Thomas's respect for her grew even more. He realized she was not only a mother, but a capable and resourceful person. As the days turned into weeks, a quiet bond developed between Thomas and Atsa. It was subtle at first, small gestures, shared glances, and mutual understanding. They did not speak the same language perfectly, but they communicated in other ways. A nod, a smile, or a helping hand carried more meaning than words. Thomas admired her strength and her dedication to her children. Atza appreciated his fairness, his patience, and the trust he had shown in letting them stay. The children thrived in this new environment. They laughed and played in the open desert spaces, learning to climb, run, and explore safely. Atza watched them with pride, feeling a sense of relief she had not felt in months. She knew that while the world outside could be harsh and unforgiving, here, in this small corner of the desert, her children could grow strong and healthy. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned orange and pink, Thomas and Atza sat together outside the cabin. The children played nearby, their laughter floating in the warm evening air. Thomas spoke quietly, reflecting on the changes he had seen. "Life is not always easy," he said, "but sometimes when we help others, we find something we didn't know we were missing." Atza nodded, understanding his meaning. She had risked everything for her children, and in doing so, she had found safety, warmth, and a sense of belonging she had thought was lost forever. They had both been changed by the encounter, her children now safe and fed, and Thomas discovering the value of compassion and connection. As night fell, the desert became quiet once more, but inside the small ranch there was light, warmth, and life. Atza tucked her children into bed, holding them close. She whispered promises that tomorrow would bring more food, more safety, and more hope. For the first time in many months, she allowed herself to feel peace. In the silence of the desert night, a mother's love had met a rancher's understanding, and together they had created a small but powerful haven. It was a beginning, not just for survival, but for trust, respect, and the possibility of a better future. The desert outside remained vast and harsh, but inside there was warmth, hope, and the quiet magic of compassion. Life at the ranch settled into a new rhythm as days turned into weeks and then months. The small cabin near the edge of the property, once empty and quiet, now hummed with activity and laughter. Atza worked tirelessly to care for her children, her hands always busy with chores, cooking, mending clothes, and helping wherever she could. Each day she grew a little stronger, and each day she began to feel a sense of stability that had been missing for months. Her children, once weak and fragile, were now stronger and more confident, their cheeks rosy and their eyes full of curiosity and wonder. Thomas watched them all closely. He had lived on this ranch for many years, always alone except for his animals, and never expected that he would find his life changed by the presence of a mother and her children. At first, he had kept his distance, unsure how to act around Atza. He was a man of routine, practical and reserved, not used to warmth or laughter. But now, with the children running through the yard, chasing chickens, and climbing small trees, he began to realize how empty his life had been before. Their energy and happiness were contagious, and even he found himself smiling more often than he could remember. Atza and Thomas were careful to respect each other's space. At first, communication was difficult. Atza spoke a mixture of her native language and broken English, while Thomas's words were sometimes too fast or unfamiliar to her. Yet they found ways to understand each other. A gesture, a smile, a nod, or a small action could convey more than words ever could. Over time, they developed a quiet understanding, a sense of trust that grew naturally as the days passed. The children were curious about everything. They wanted to learn about the ranch, the animals, and the wide open desert around them. Atza took time to teach them basic survival skills, which plants were safe to eat, how to find water in the desert, and how to recognize signs of approaching weather. Thomas helped them learn practical skills for the ranch, feeding the animals, gathering eggs, and learning the rhythm of daily work. Together, the trio of mother, children, and rancher created a small community of learning and growth. Atza's presence also began to affect Thomas in ways he had not expected. He was a man who had always preferred solitude, believing that the world was safer when one relied only on oneself. But now he found himself thinking about Atza and her children constantly, wondering if they had enough, if they were happy, if they were safe. He discovered that caring for others brought him a sense of satisfaction he had never known. Each time he saw the children laughing or saw Atza smile, he felt a warmth he had long forgotten. One day, a neighbor from the nearby town rode up to the ranch. His horse kicked up dust as he approached, and he looked around with a critical eye. I hear you've taken in an Apache woman and her children, the man said, his tone sharp. Do you realize how dangerous that is? People might not understand why you're helping them. Some might say you're foolish, even putting your own ranch at risk. Thomas listened quietly, his hands resting on the fence post. He nodded slowly. I know the risks, he said, but these children are hungry and this woman is trying to care for them. I cannot turn them away when they need help. I do not see danger here, only people who need kindness. The neighbor frowned but said no more. He left, riding back down the dusty trail, muttering to himself. Thomas watched him disappear, then turned back to Atza and the children, who were tending to the small garden near the cabin. They had planted a few vegetables, and the children were learning how to care for them. Their small hands moved carefully through the soil, watering and pulling weeds, while Atza guided them gently. That afternoon, Atza took the children on a short walk to a nearby dry riverbed. She wanted to teach them how to move safely through the desert and how to recognize landmarks. The children listened closely, absorbing every word. See this rock? She said, pointing to a large boulder. If you ever get lost, you can find your way by remembering it. And see the way the sun sets behind that hill? That tells you the west. The children nodded, repeating her words, learning the ways of the land. Thomas watched from a distance, impressed by her knowledge and patience. He realized that Atza was not just teaching her children. She was teaching them to be self-reliant, confident, and aware of the world around them. She was preparing them for a life beyond the ranch, even as she created a safe haven for them now. The bond between Thomas and Atza grew quietly but steadily. There were small moments that hinted at deeper understanding. When Atza cooked the children's meals, Thomas sometimes helped without being asked, carrying water or chopping firewood. When Thomas repaired a fence or tended the animals, Atza would offer a helping hand or a word of encouragement. They did not speak often about feelings, but the actions themselves spoke volumes. There was respect, trust, and a sense of partnership forming between them. One afternoon, a minor accident occurred. A small fire began near the hay storage when a spark from the fireplace landed on some dry straw. Atza noticed the smoke immediately. She shouted to Thomas, who grabbed a bucket of water while she ran to help him contain the fire. Together, they managed to put it out before it spread, saving most of the hay and preventing damage to the barn. Thomas looked at Atza with admiration. Her quick thinking and bravery had prevented disaster. He realized she was more than just a caring mother. She was capable, courageous, and intelligent. After the fire, Thomas brought her a small cup of tea and said quietly, "You are very capable. I am glad you are here." Atza smiled, a gentle warmth in her eyes. "I am only doing what a mother must do," she said softly. Her words were simple, but Thomas understood their depth. She was not asking for praise. She was living her truth, caring for her children with all her strength. As the weeks passed, the children grew more confident and playful. They ran across the yard, climbed trees, and learned to ride ponies. Atza watched them with pride, feeling joy she had not felt in months. She had risked everything to find safety and food, and now her children were thriving. Their laughter filled the ranch, replacing the silence that had once dominated the space. Thomas found himself thinking about them more often than he expected. He realized that he cared for their well-being deeply. He wanted them to be safe, happy, and healthy. It was a new feeling for him, concern that went beyond his own life or work. He was learning to care for others in a way he had never imagined. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of orange and pink, Thomas and Atza sat outside the cabin. The children were playing nearby, their laughter carrying on the gentle desert breeze. Thomas spoke quietly, reflecting on the changes he had seen. "Life is not always easy," he said, "but sometimes when we help others, we find something we didn't know we were missing." Atza nodded, understanding his meaning. "I have learned that too," she said softly. "Even in hardship, kindness can change everything." They shared a quiet moment, watching the sky turn dark and the stars appear, each star shining like a promise of hope. In the weeks that followed, life continued with small but meaningful routines. Atza and Thomas worked together on the ranch. She helped tend the animals, feed the chickens, and gather eggs. He taught the children how to care for the cattle, how to repair fences, and how to navigate the desert safely. Together, they created a balanced life of learning, work, and care. The local townspeople began to notice the change as well. Some had initially whispered about the risks of sheltering an Apache woman and her children, But now they saw the difference in the children's health, in the happiness of the small family, and in the peaceful atmosphere of the ranch. Slowly, respect replaced suspicion. Atsa was no longer seen as a stranger or outsider. She was a mother working hard for her children and contributing to the ranch in meaningful ways. Thomas also changed in ways he could not fully describe. His days felt fuller, richer, and warmer. He had discovered the value of compassion, trust, and connection. He had lived for years in solitude, but now he realized that life shared with others, even strangers at first, could bring joy, learning, and a sense of purpose he had never known. One afternoon, as the children laughed while chasing chickens and playing with small sticks, Thomas and Atsa exchanged a look of understanding. Words were unnecessary. Their bond had grown stronger through shared experience, mutual respect, and quiet acts of kindness. They had discovered that trust could be built slowly, that courage could inspire hope, and that small choices, like helping someone in need, could change lives forever. By the time the sun set that evening, casting long shadows across the ranch, it was clear that life had been transformed. Atsa's children were no longer weak or frightened. They were strong, playful, and learning skills that would help them survive and thrive. Atsa herself had grown more confident and capable, a steady presence who cared deeply for her children and the ranch that had become her temporary home. Thomas had learned that compassion and understanding could bring unexpected rewards, filling his life with warmth, trust, and a sense of family he had never thought possible. In the quiet desert night, the ranch stood as a symbol of new beginnings. It was a place where fear had been replaced by hope, where survival had been met with kindness, and where the bonds between people, however different their backgrounds, could grow stronger than the challenges around them. Spring had arrived at the ranch, and with it came a sense of renewal and hope. The desert, once dry and harsh, now showed signs of life. Small flowers peeked through the sandy soil. The garden near the cabin had grown lush and green, and the air was filled with the gentle hum of insects and birds. Atsa's children had grown stronger and more playful over the winter months, and their laughter filled every corner of the ranch. Their cheeks were rosy, their eyes bright, and their steps confident. Each day, Atsa felt a deep sense of relief. Her children were safe, fed, and thriving, a reality she had dreamed of during the long, lonely nights of hunger. The children now helped with daily chores, learning alongside their mother and Thomas. They carried water from the well, fed the chickens, and gathered firewood. Sometimes they ran ahead, exploring small parts of the desert, learning its rhythms and secrets under Atsa's careful guidance. She taught them which plants were safe to eat, how to recognize animal tracks, and how to be cautious near the edges of the dry riverbeds. She wanted them to grow strong, independent, and capable of surviving in the harsh world around them. Thomas watched quietly as Atsa guided the children, a mixture of pride and admiration in his eyes. He had spent most of his life alone, focused solely on the ranch, the cattle, and the routines of daily survival. But now, with Atsa and her children around, his life had gained new meaning. He had discovered the quiet joys of teaching, guiding, and caring for others. He had learned that compassion could create a bond stronger than fear or suspicion. Life at the ranch had also brought them closer together. Thomas and Atsa had developed a deep understanding, a friendship built on shared experiences and mutual respect. They did not always need words to communicate. A glance, a small gesture, or an act of kindness often conveyed more than language could. Atsa admired Thomas's patience, his hard work, and his willingness to trust her despite the dangers she had faced. Thomas, in turn, admired Atsa's courage, her unwavering love for her children, and her wisdom in navigating both the challenges of the desert and the complexities of life. One afternoon, as Thomas repaired a fence near the edge of the property, Atsa joined him, carrying a small basket of freshly picked vegetables from the garden. She smiled as she handed him the basket. "You have done much for us," she said quietly. "You gave my children food, safety, and a chance to grow. I am grateful." Thomas paused, wiping his hands on his pants. "You have done much too," he replied. "You have cared for your children, taught them, and helped them grow strong. You are not only surviving, you are thriving, and your courage has brought new life to this ranch." Atsa's eyes softened. She felt a warmth in her heart she had not experienced since her husband's death. She realized that the ranch had become more than a place to survive. It had become a home, a sanctuary where she and her children could feel safe, loved, and valued. The children, sensing the calm and happiness around them, began to explore their surroundings more confidently. They learned to ride ponies, climb trees, and play in the open spaces without fear. Atza and Thomas watched them with pride, recognizing the growth not only in their strength but in their spirits. The children laughed freely, a sound that had been missing from the ranch for many years. Each smile and giggle was a reminder that kindness and care could transform lives. As the days grew longer and warmer, Atza decided to teach the children about the stars. She led them outside one clear night, pointing to the bright points of light in the sky. "See those stars?" she said. "Each one is a story, a guide. If you ever feel lost, remember them. They will always remind you of hope and of the people who care for you." The children looked up in wonder, their small faces illuminated by the soft light of the moon. Thomas stood nearby, quietly listening. He felt a deep sense of peace and connection, realizing that the children were learning not just survival skills, but lessons about life, hope, and resilience. The local community gradually began to notice the change at the ranch. Some neighbors who had once been skeptical about Thomas's decision to shelter Atza and her children began to admire his compassion. They saw how the children had grown strong and healthy, how the ranch was running smoothly, and how the small family had found balance and happiness. Over time, respect replaced suspicion, and a sense of admiration for Thomas's generosity and Atza's dedication began to spread throughout the town. One morning, as the family sat together enjoying breakfast, Thomas reflected on the journey they had all experienced. "We have come far," he said, his voice thoughtful. "When we first met, none of us knew what the future would hold. We were all uncertain, afraid, and struggling, but look at us now, stronger, happier, and together. We have built something new, something lasting." Atza nodded, smiling at the children who were busily eating their food. "We have learned that life is not only about survival," she said. "It is about caring for one another, trusting each other, and finding hope even in difficult times. We are stronger because we have each other." The children, now full and energized, ran outside to play. They chased each other across the yard, climbed small hills, and explored the edges of the garden. Their laughter echoed across the ranch, blending with the gentle sounds of the desert, the wind rustling through the bushes, the distant calls of birds, and the low hum of insects. The ranch had transformed from a quiet, lonely place into a lively home filled with warmth, love, and joy. Thomas and Atza continued to work together, managing the ranch and caring for the children. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth, learning, and connection. Thomas taught the children practical skills, showing them how to care for the animals, mend fences, and navigate the desert safely. Atza taught them life skills, kindness, and resilience. Together, they created a balanced life that nurtured both the body and the spirit. One evening, as the sun set behind the distant hills, Thomas and Atza stood together, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The children played nearby, their laughter carrying on the warm evening breeze. Thomas spoke quietly, reflecting on the changes in their lives. "I used to believe that life was better when one relied only on oneself," he said. "But now I understand that sharing life with others, caring for them, and trusting them can bring joy and meaning we cannot find alone." Atza smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "I have learned that too," she said softly. "Even in the hardest times, kindness and understanding can create something stronger than fear or hardship. We have found family, hope, and safety together." As the seasons continued to change, the ranch flourished. The garden grew bountiful, the animals were healthy, and the children thrived. Atza's confidence grew, and she became an integral part of the ranch, respected by Thomas and admired by the children. Thomas, in turn, discovered the deep satisfaction that comes from helping others, from caring for those in need, and from witnessing growth and happiness in others. The story of their journey spread slowly through the nearby town. People began to understand that compassion and trust could overcome fear and prejudice. Thomas's decision to help Atza and her children became an example of courage and kindness. Atza's dedication as a mother, her resilience, and her willingness to work hard inspired those who heard her story. Together, they demonstrated that even in the harshest environments, hope, kindness, and perseverance could create a better life. One clear night, as the family sat together outside the cabin, Atsa told the children stories about their father. She spoke of his bravery, his love, and the lessons he had taught them. The children listened closely, absorbing every word. Thomas sat nearby, quietly reflecting on the importance of family, memory, and love. He realized that although he had no children of his own, he could play a role in nurturing, guiding, and protecting these young lives. Over time, the bonds between Thomas, Atsa, and the children grew stronger. They shared meals, worked together on the ranch, and supported one another through challenges. Trust, respect, and love became the foundation of their small family. Each day brought new lessons, joys, and discoveries. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and hope. By the time summer approached, it was clear that life had transformed for everyone. The children were healthy, happy, and strong. Atsa had found stability, dignity, and safety. Thomas had discovered a sense of purpose, connection, and family that he had never known. The desert, once harsh and unforgiving, had become a place of growth, learning, and new beginnings. In the quiet moments, as the sun set and the desert turned golden, Thomas and Atsa would often stand together, watching their children play. Words were not always necessary. They had built trust, understanding, and a life together through small acts of kindness, courage, and perseverance. Their story was one of hope, resilience, and the power of compassion to transform lives. And so, in the heart of the Arizona desert, a childless rancher, a widow, and her children found safety, love, and a future. Their lives, once uncertain and filled with struggle, had been reshaped by courage, trust, and the simple truth that helping one another can create lasting change. Atsa's children thrived, Thomas found family and purpose, and the ranch became a place where hope and kindness could grow. In a land often harsh and unforgiving, they had created a home built not just on survival, but on understanding, respect, and the quiet power of love.